Frankenstein. Goodbye, son. We'll see you on the other side. Howdy, y'all. Joe Hills here, recording as I always do in Nashville, Tennessee. And today on the HermitCraft server, we are going to be reading Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. We read the preface to Frankenstein, the epistolary preface, the first 4 letters from Captain Walton on our previous stream, which if you're watching this later, you can find in the same playlist as this one. We are going to give myself a few minutes to warm up my voice before we pop in. If you have not seen one of our reading streams before, this is not exactly like a book on tape. I am going to be reading segments from the book in the biggest logical chunks possible. I will occasionally be surprised aloud by something I read or take a second to talk to you guys about it. This is more like somebody reading a book aloud at a party or to a child or to a friend. Like, this is a reading, not a book on tape, okay? We are going to be reading Frankenstein. Chat, hold on a sec. I am just about to get you the updated Chapter 1 link, because the what we're reading link I have from last week is pointing at the letter 4. There are 4 letters from Captain Walton that make up the preface to Frankenstein, or the epistolary preface. There is a literal preface, but this is the stuff that rolls in before Chapter 1. Why is the... I feel like there was a Chapter 1. Boom, 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 boom. Give me a second here while I thought I had the right link, but I'm gonna double check that because this looks slightly off. So, Project Gutenberg. Menu, search and browse. Frankenstein. This is a real professional outfit here, people. Also, I'm given the lawn crew that would normally be here earlier in the week is not here earlier in the week. They're here today because presumably the rain earlier in the week messed up problems. So it is actually like super loud directly outside my garage door right now. I'm not sure if it's that loud for you too. I really hope it's not. I really hope it's not. But we're going to, like a minute and a half before I hit start streaming, they were literally blowing like leaf debris and twigs against the garage door that is like 4 feet to my right. So we are going to post the what we're reading link. Here it is. And we're going to pin that in both YouTube and Twitch chats while giving them out there an opportunity to wander a little bit further off. You can't hear nothing. Good. I tweaked the microphone's directionality and stuff a little bit before we started the stream, but I wasn't sure how much of that was still going to get picked up. When they're actually blowing debris against the door, it is super loud, though. It sounds like rain on a tin roof, except it's twigs on a aluminum garage door. Kindlist says, how is the Orward server on hard drive space? Should have a couple 100 gigs right now. I just cleaned it yesterday, I think. But where was I? So, a few other things before we get started. We are using a special long-distance level of detail rendering mod called Voxy. This is in currently kind of a closed beta available to people in Cortex's Discord. Cortex is the developer. So if you're like, how come you can see so far away on HermitCraft? That's why. It's a fancy level of detail mod by Cortex called Voxy. We are just kind of looking at everything here. It's pretty cool. Now, our focus for this stream is not going to be out there in the far, far distance. Although it is cool to look in the far, far distance and see all that stuff. Our focus is actually going to be back here at Hermit Homedale on clearing out that area there. Now, right now, there's not snow showing up. You're going to notice as I fly around with Voxy, snow and ice doesn't show up outside of a certain radius. That is one of the things that Cortex is working on fixing. So that's one of the reasons this is not a publicly released mod yet. So, just be aware of that. There's also some things like the ice around that water and the opacity there is kind of weird. It's not great. It's not ideal, but still, this mod is absolutely bonkers at so many things. Like the fact that I can just sit here and be like, oh, whose base is that all the way over there? And the level of detail thing. It's the thing I love about this mod is that the blocks that make up the low level of detail mock-ups of things approximate it in such a delightful way. You know? But yeah, you can look at something and then it'll just kind of get more and more refined with the number of blocks that comprise it. It's pretty cool. Okay, so where was I? Frankenstein, Chapter 1. A few other notes before we get started. This is a viewer-supported stream. If you enjoy streams at this time, rolling out of bed early on a Saturday is something special we're doing today because I'm taking my kids somewhere later and couldn't do the stream. Normally, these Saturday night streams are on Saturday night here in Tennessee at 8:30 p.m. We're streaming at 8:30 a.m. So, yeah, if you appreciate this sort of timing, one of the best ways to indicate that is by sending tips, because this is a viewer-supported stream. My entire YouTube channel is also viewer-supported. Basically, I fund the YouTube channel out of these streams. So if you like the YouTube videos, but you don't really care for the streams, believe me, tipping on the streams is still the best way to get more videos, because YouTube ad revenue is not what it used to be. But yeah, let's see. So when tips do roll in, I will acknowledge them. The camera gets bigger when we hit certain tipping milestones. I'm currently down here in front of the green screen in slot 9, putting the hot in the hot bar. So we will bust out of that when we hit our first milestone. I don't always interrupt a chapter for tips. If there's not a logical break in the reading, I probably won't acknowledge your tips until we hit one, which is why if you want to get those in now while we're waiting for the leaf blower guys to further recede, that would be fantastic. Let's see, what else? Sometimes if I do make a mistake in the reading and I get flustered, I'm like, I can't believe I mispronounced that. Let me take a quick break. It is always nice to have a tip ready to acknowledge when that happens. Gets me a second to breathe and then back in the groove. Yep, the link to what we're reading is pinned, so you can find that on Project Gutenberg. We just got our first tip of the stream rolling in. And let's see who that is from. It is from Charles Ham, who says, has like a little smile with a 3. I don't know how to pronounce that. Is that a cat smile? Is that a Cheshire smile? I don't know. But thank you for the little cat smile and the 10. That's going to get us halfway to our first face camera expansion. So I'm just going to mark that on my scratch paper here because I don't have a new abacus yet. Let's see. Running through our pre-stream checklist, we need to post that we are about to read Frankenstein on Blue Sky. We need to post the tipping link. We need to pin the reading. We need to set our status on the server. Didn't do that yet. This is also, for some of you guys who might be like, why is there so much preamble to all of this reading? Why not just jump in on the reading? Well, all of the setup tasks that I normally do when I start a stream, I can't do with the music running. I have to talk through them. So we are doing all of those tasks. Alrighty. So we have everything pulled up now that I think we are going to need. Other format notes. Yes. Oh, yeah. The big part of this is that we are going to be doing tasks in Minecraft that might be monotonous and boring otherwise. This is called a read and grind. Because, like, for example, I need to clear out all the terrain inside of that rectangle. That's a whole rectangle full of terrain to clear out. I also need to do a bunch of terraforming inside this path here. Boy, that's a lot of digging. Basically, we are going to take all the tasks that would be kind of monotonous, and try to do as many of those each Saturday as we can while reading a book. In the past, we've read Dracula, we've read Moby Dick, and now we are on to Frankenstein. So here we go. Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus, by Mary Shelley, Chapter 1. I am by birth a Genovese, and my family is one of the most distinguished of that republic. My ancestors had been for many years counselors and syndics, and my father had filled several public situations with honor and reputation. He was respected by all who knew him for his integrity and indefatigable attention to public business. He passed his younger days perpetually occupied by the effect had prevented his marrying early, nor was it until the decline of his life that he became a husband and the father of a family. As the circumstances of his marriage illustrate his character, I cannot refrain from relating them. One of his most intimate friends was a merchant who, from a flourishing state, fell through numerous mischances into poverty. This man, whose name was Beaufort, we're going to tweak the volume down just a little bit here. Sorry. This man, whose name was Beaufort, was of a proud and unbending disposition, and could not bear to live in poverty and oblivion in the same country where he had formerly been distinguished for his rank and magnificence. Having paid his debts, therefore, in the most honorable manner, he retreated with his daughter to the town of Lucerne, where he lived unknown and in wretchedness. My father loved Beaufort with the truest friendship, and was deeply grieved by his retreat in these unfortunate circumstances. He bitterly deplored the false pride which led his friend to a conduct so little worthy of the affection that united them. He lost no time in endeavoring to seek him out, with the hope of persuading him to begin the world again through his credit and assistance. Beaufort had taken effectual means to conceal himself, and it was 10 months before my father discovered his abode. Overjoyed at this discovery, he hastened to the house, which was situated in a mean street near the Rus. But when he entered, misery and despair alone welcomed him. Beaufort had saved but a very small sum of sustenance, had saved but a very small sum of money from the wreck of his fortunes, but it was sufficient to provide him with sustenance for some months, and in the meantime he hoped to procure some respectable employment in a merchant's house. The interval was consequently spent in inaction. His grief only became more deep and rankling when he had leisure for reflection, and at length it took so fast hold of his mind that at the end of 3 months he lay on a bed of sickness, incapable of exertion. People are saying the sound is cutting in and out. Let's take a second to troubleshoot the sound. Are you guys saying that was the shovel noise too loud, or are you saying like my microphone is actually cutting in and out? My audio is choppy. We're seeing 3 people on YouTube saying there's audio problems on YouTube. People in Twitch, what are you guys seeing? It's fine on Twitch. Anybody else on YouTube? Lakshmi13 says Mike. Mike alone is not enough to troubleshoot from. Do you have any follow-up details, Lakshmi13? while we wait on that, thank you very much to Anon for tipping 5, who says, woo, working artist solidarity. Sorry it's so little, but hopefully it can help some. Believe me, every little bit helps at this time. This is always a rough time of year because between April 15th and June 15th, I have to raise a full quarter's worth of quarterly taxes, even though it's only 2 months. So this is always like the roughest 2 months of the year financially. And because I just took like 8 days off to go to Seattle, and I'm taking a few days off to see my sister's graduation in May, it's an especially helpful time for any small amount y'all want to give. Lakshmi13 says, I'm watching on YouTube. It sounds like you're pausing very weirdly. Charles says, reloading the YouTube app fixed it for me. Raystar says, I heard pause in your reading cadence, but not the mic cutting out. TB says, it's still cutting out for me. I wonder why it's just some of us. YouTube changed a bunch of stuff with their encoding recently, and it's caused a lot of quality problems for uploaded videos. I did not expect it to be impacting live streams. That's not good. The VOD of this is going to be on YouTube. You know what? Okay, I'm gonna make... Queen Dark Lady says, literally just switched to YouTube and it sounds fine for me. Okay. In terms of the mix with the dirt breaking, was the dirt breaking and my voice okay together? You could still hear the story over it. Where do you find out about YouTube encoding changes? You look at a video and go, oh, this is garbage. They don't tell us. They don't tell us anything. We find out when our videos look bad. And we had a bunch of problems with Hermit's uploads coming out sideways. Maybe turn Minecraft down slightly more. Okay. That's just a little bit more. Because, like, we want the Minecraft sounds. That's part of this. And that's also to discourage companies from just taking the audio of me reading this book and repackaging it. This is what makes it a read and grind and not a book on tape. The fact that this is both. Okay, people who are having YouTube problems, twitch.tv/JoeHills. Can anybody who's specifically currently having a YouTube problem check the twitch.tv/JoeHills and let me know? I'm curious if maybe the audio is weird with something with your hardware or your audio drivers. And if it's not weird, if it's not cutting out on Twitch, then it's definitely a YouTube problem. But it might just be people who have a specific type of audio card or something. Miss Gold Fox says fixed for me on the reload. Okay. Chalice Puma Sway, tips are welcome via paypal.me/JoeHills and YouTube Super Chat. Somebody had asked, how much money does it take to expand the face camera to the max? There really isn't a maximum. It just kind of keeps rolling over. I came up with this system when I recently found out, or at the time I came up with this system years ago. I need to frame this as this happened years ago. But when I came up with this system, I had just recently been served with divorce papers and found out I was going to basically be a single parent. And so this system was designed with the thought that, okay, if I'm going to be a single parent, I need all the help I can get. There's no maximum to the amount that people can give to make the camera bigger. It rolls over and does weird stuff and gets weirder and weirder, but there's no max. Okay, we got another tip rolling in. Let's see who that's from. Dun, 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 dun. Thank you to Eleanor for tipping 10, who says, good morning, I love Frankenstein. Me too. Excellent, excellent, excellent. That's going to get us 5 past our first face camera expansion. Please direct your attention to slot 9 where I'm putting the hot bar so I can say, howdy y'all, Grow Hills here, expanding as I always do in Nashville, Tennessee. Dee-da-dee-da-dee, dee-da-dee-da-dee, dee-dee. Okay. So we are still going to need our portal to be this high to avoid the mail system. But we can build that into that welcome center somehow. We are also going to need more boxes at some point, which, of course, I had at one point earlier and then now no longer have, due to my exceptional planning talents. We don't even have a workbench. Okay. So Renee says the audio is working now. It's unclear if that means because of a reset or because of switching to Twitch, but core concept, it sounds like people will be able to hear me read, which is a big part of why I read, so that people can listen and enjoy. So yeah, we're gonna get back to that. Thank you guys for your patience. OpenBag 2 reminds us that Alphabet and their subsidiaries, like Google, love their A/B testing. So they might be trying some sort of new audio encoder on half of the audience, which is why a reload fixes it, because the A/B testing is being assigned on page load or session creation, not by user. That is entirely possible. That's good thought, OpenBag 2. It's also possible that maybe if it spams reload, it kicks people out of the A/B test and gives them the previous default functionality. It's like, okay, these people have reloaded the page 5 times in the last 10 minutes. Something is wrong with our tests. Let's kick them out. Hey, we got a tip rolling in from Rachel, who says, creepy story time early on Saturday makes for a good time. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, this is our Euro-friendly stream time. So please direct your attention to the lower left, because I'm about to expand Joe. Do-do-do-do. Okay. So, Ed of the Zeta says, even though I'm new here, this seems early for a stream. Don't worry, we always keep an up-to-date stream schedule for medium to moderate definitions of up-to-date at twitch.tv. No, not twitch.tv. At joehills.net/soon. Okay. So yeah, if people come in into the chat and are having audio problems, ask them in the chat, please, to reload. I'm not going to be able to keep taking breaks. I didn't... okay, so how far did we get in to Chapter 1? Hey, thank you, Sean Cockrell, who says, howdy, Mini Joe. That does indeed get us 5 past our next face camera expansion milestone. So please direct your attention down here, because I'm about to expand Joe. Do-do-do-do. Okay. So far, we've established that the guy that Robert Walton picked up on his ship had a father who was a syndic, which, if you think of the word syndicate, it's like the sort of person who runs things in a large group organization, like a government in this case. So he's a public figure. He's somebody well-renowned, well-esteemed, and one of his friends has run into trouble. His friend Beaufort. And so we are going to see what Beaufort is up to and how the mysterious man on the ice's father handles this situation, which is supposedly going to speak to his character. So, let's continue. Okay. So Beaufort was looking to procure employment, but hadn't yet. So here we go. The interval was, consequently, spent in inaction. His grief only became the more deep and rankling when he had leisure for reflection, and at length it took so fast hold of his mind that at the end of 3 months he lay on a bed of sickness, incapable of any exertion. His daughter attended him with the greatest tenderness, but she saw with despair that their little fund was rapidly decreasing, and there was no other prospect of support. But Caroline Beaufort possessed a mind of an uncommon mold, and her courage rose to support her in her adversity. She procured plain work. She plaited straw and by various means contrived to earn a pittance scarcely sufficient to support life. Several months passed in this manner, Her father grew worse. Her time was more entirely occupied in attending him. Her means of subsistence decreased, and in the 10th month, her father died in her arms, leaving her an orphan and a beggar. This last blow overcame her, and she knelt by Beaufort's coffin, weeping bitterly, when my father entered the chamber. He came like a protecting spirit to the poor girl, who committed herself to his care, and after the internment of his friend, he conducted her to Geneva and placed her under the protection of a relation. 2 years after this event, Caroline became his wife. There was a considerable difference in the ages of my parents, but this circumstance seemed to unite them only closer in the bonds of devoted affection. There was a sense of justice in my father's upright mind which rendered it necessary that he should approve highly, to love strongly. Perhaps during former years he had suffered from the late discovered unworthiness of one beloved, and was so disposed to set a greater value on tried worth. There was a show of gratitude and worship in his attachment to my mother, differing wholly from the doting fondness of age, for it was inspired by reverence for her virtues and a desire to be the means of, in some degree, recompensing her for the sorrows she had endured, but which gave inexpressible grace to his behavior to her. Everything was made to yield to her wishes and her convenience. He strove to shelter her, as a fair exotic is sheltered by the gardener, from every rougher wind, and to surround her with all she could tend to, with all that could tend to excite pleasurable emotion in her soft and benevolent mind. Her health, and even the tranquility of her hitherto constant spirit, had been shaken by what she had gone through. During the 2 years that had elapsed previous to their marriage, my father had gradually relinquished all his public functions, and immediately after their union, they sought the pleasant climate of Italy, and the change of scene and interest they attendant on a tour through the land of wonders as a restorative for her weakened frame. So as I said, this is not exactly a book on tape. We are reading this as we go. One thing I want to point out about this is, big age difference here is notable in that this is Mary Shelley writing at the age of, 19 or so. I'm not sure if she was 19 when she wrote this part or if she was 19 when she published it, but she was 18 or 19 at the time. And the idea to her of an age gap marriage is going to be, something that is going to be viewed differently maybe than if you're reading about a 60-year-old man. Like, if a 60-year-old male author was writing about, like, how great it would be for this older guy to marry this younger girl. So, yeah, this is just something to be aware of, is there's a level of importance. Obviously, it's always important to think about where the author's coming from on stuff, but it's interesting to think about Shelley's circumstance in particular, and how also keep in mind that what an 18-year-old guy was capable of affording versus, a 40 or 50-year-old guy in this time period, or really any time period, since Shelley and most women were not expected to be able to support themselves financially. Obviously, Shelley, talented writer, world-renowned now, wasn't necessarily aware of her own potential future earnings or capacity for success at the time. So, anyway, as she's creating this backstory for the speaker's family, there might be a little bit of fantasy for herself in here. Now, this is also something that she wrote to like read at, alongside her friends. They had kind of a little contest to write a story. So there's also maybe some ribbing in here where she's writing this to see if any of the older guys around her are like, wait, what's this? Huh? Like this is all you gotta, when you're writing something for specific people in the room, there's an element of like, she's trying to provoke a reaction too. So this is also possibly her messing with the people around her in an amusing way. This is a very different situation, once again, than just some random old guy drunkenly smashing away at his typewriter about how great it would be to marry a 16-year-old. So, anyway, we are going to continue. How am I transferring multiple stacks to a chest? What hotkey is that? Shift and double-clicking items, yep. Okay, before we continue, I'm going to take a sip of my drink as well. Shoebox Goblin points out that, for example, Lord Byron was there. I wonder if maybe Shelley was baiting a hook there. So anyway, once again, we are reading the novel Frankenstein aloud. So this is not just me making something up as I go. Let's dump some of this other inventory stuff before we resume the reading and have another sip of the drink real quick. Chalice Puma Sway says, love the context. Yep, that's part of the joy of reading this stuff together. So let's go. Let's keep clearing this out. We got a lot of work to do today. There was a considerable difference between the ages of my parents, but this circumstance seemed to unite them only closer in bonds of devoted affection. Oh, wait, we already read that part. Where was I? I need to scroll down. From Italy, they visited Germany and France, and I, their eldest child, was born at Naples, and as an infant accompanied them in their rambles. I remained for several years their only child. Much as they were attached to each other, they seemed to draw inexhaustible stores of affection from a very mine of love to bestow them upon me. My mother's tender caress and my father's smile of benevolent pleasure while regarding me are my first recollections. I was their plaything and their idol, and something better, their child, the innocent and helpless creature bestowed on them by heaven, whom to bring up to good, and whose future lot it was in their hands to direct to happiness or misery, according as they fulfilled their duties toward me. With this deep consciousness of what they owed toward the being to which they had given life, added to the active spirit of tenderness and that animated both. It may be imagined that while during every hour of my infant life I received a lesson of patience, of charity, and of self-control, I was so guided by a silken cord that all seemed but one train of enjoyment to me. For a long time, I was their only care. My mother had much desired to have a daughter, but I continued their single offspring. When I was about 5 years old, while making an excursion beyond the frontiers of Italy, They passed a week on the shores of the Lake of Como. Their benevolent disposition often made them enter the cottages of the poor. This, to my mother, was more than a duty. It was a necessity, a passion, remembering what she had suffered and how she had been relieved. For her to act in turn, the guardian and angel to the afflicted. During one of their walks, a poor cot in the foldings of a veil attracted their notice as being singularly disconsolate, while the number of half-clothed children gathered about it spoke of penury in the worst shape. One day, when my father had gone by himself to Milan, my mother, accompanied by me, visited this abode. She found a peasant and his wife, hard-working, bent down by care and labor, distributing a scanty meal to 5 hungry babes. Among these, there was one that attracted my mother far above all the rest. She appeared of a different stock. The 4 others were dark-eyed, hardy little vagrants. This child was very thin and fair. Her hair was the brightest living gold, and despite the poverty of her clothing, seemed to set a crown of distinction on her head. Her brow was clear and ample, her blue eyes cloudless, and her lips and the molding of her face so expressive of sensibility and sweetness that none could behold her without looking on her as of a distinct species, a being heaven-sent, and bearing a celestial stamp in all her features. The peasant woman, perceiving that my mother fixed eyes of wonder and admiration on this lovely girl, eagerly communicated her history. She was not her child, but the daughter of a Milanese nobleman. Her mother was a German and had died on giving her birth. The infant had been placed with these good people to nurse. They were better off then. They had not been long married, and their eldest child was just to be born. The father of their charge was one of the Italians nursed in the memory of the antique glory of Italy, one among the Schiavi Agnor Fermenti, who exerted himself to obtain the liberty of his country. He became the victim of its weakness. Whether he had died or still lingered in the dungeons of Austria was not known. His property was confiscated. His child became an orphan and a beggar. She continued with her foster parents and bloomed in their rude abode, fairer than a garden rose among dark-leaved brambles. When my father returned from Milan, he found me playing in the hall of our villa. With a child fairer than pictured cherub, a creature who seemed to shed radiance from her looks, and whose form and motions were lighter than the chamois of the hills. The apparition was soon explained. With his permission, my mother prevailed on her rustic guardians to yield the charge to her. They were fond of the sweet orphan. Her presence had seemed a blessing to them, but it would be unfair to her to keep her in poverty and want when Providence afforded her such powerful protection. They consulted with the village priest, and the result was that Elizabeth Lavenza became the inmate of my parents' house, my more than sister, the beautiful and adored companion of all my occupations and my pleasures. Everyone loved Elizabeth. The passionate and almost reverential attachment with which all regarded her became, while I shared it, my pride and my delight. On the evening previous to her being brought to my home, my mother said playfully, "I have a pretty present for my Victor. Tomorrow he shall have it." And when, on the morrow, she presented Elizabeth to me as her promised gift, I, with childish seriousness, interpreted her words literally, and looked upon Elizabeth as mine, mine to protect, love, and cherish. All praises bestowed on her I received as made to a possession of my own. We called each other familiarly by the name of cousins. No word, no expression could body forth the kind of relation in which she stood to me, my more than sister, since till death she was to be mine only. And that concludes Chapter 1 of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Does anybody have any thoughts on Chapter 1? You know, one of the things we've talked about is how in these older stories there's a lot of framing and narrative setup for stuff. But generally, this is not wasted. This is intended to set a tone or to establish certain themes that we're going to come back to. And I think it's interesting here that we are apparently hearing from little Victor. Apparently Victor is the name of the man who was found out on the ice. We are hearing from Victor about his youth. Now, some of y'all might think, Victor Frankenstein, that name sounds familiar. I feel like I might know parts of this story. You probably do. If you haven't read it, you're probably familiar with certain elements of the Frankenstein narrative. And I think it's a fun challenge to try to look at the parts that we're seeing here, the themes, the bits and pieces, and try to figure out how those might fit in with that narrative. You know, even if all you know about Frankenstein as a story is green monster, lightning, you know, resurrection, you know, okay. So how would hearing about a loving family or a family that takes, how would hearing about parents correspond with a story about a resurrected monster that has no sense of identity initially? You know, Victor talks about how his parents, you know, drew joy from him and loved him and contributed to his development. Is that going to impact how Frankenstein deals with his own creations? Let's find out. Interestingly, you might think, well, maybe he's only talking about familial love in blood relations, but he goes out of his way to introduce the idea of adoption into families. This is not an accident. Narratively, Mary Shelley, when writing this, is establishing things about how Victor Frankenstein views the world and how he's going to make choices, and this is going to reveal things about his character as we go through the story. Now, the other thing that we saw in the letters last week was Captain Walton talking about, like, all of Captain Walton's letters were to his sister. And so, you know, and this is one of the things, like, Walton talking about his sister is, I think, one of the things that provoked Victor to begin sharing his story. So there's the question of, like, oh, did some tragedy happen here? Let's find out. Okay. So, just as a reminder, this is a viewer-supported stream, and we are currently $15 away from our next Face Camera expansion milestone. Tips are welcome via paypal.me/JoeHills and YouTube Super Chat. The Mintus says, I'm only familiar with Young Frankenstein. And so this is a lot different. Anybody else have any thoughts they want to share? That chapter only took us 45 minutes to get through, although a lot of that was dealing with audio issues. So I think we have time to get chapter 2 started. Although I like to take a little break between chapters, hear from y'all about your thoughts, and also have an opportunity to sip my drink some. Let's see. So we need to make sure that the dirt block ones are insulated from the grass blocks. Okay, so now we have more places to put dirt. How are we for shovels? Not great. Let's also update our shovel stock here. Boom, 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 boom. And we can free up a fireworks slot. We definitely don't need this many fireworks right now. And we can drop that off. How were we on grass blocks, actually? Okay, yeah, we still have plenty of chests. So, yeah, that should be good. The Mintus says, I never even thought Frankenstein had a childhood. I do that with a lot of main characters unless it's introduced. Well, that's the thing about this sort of thing, is like, that's kind of, I think, one of the themes of the book, though, is about how we interact with those who created us. And how we interact with those we create. Samsara says, the older father doting on the young wife is more interesting when you look at it, though, through the frame of Frankenstein and his relationship to the monster. Do you see it similarly? Well, we haven't met the monster yet. We've only seen him in the distance. So I think that's something to look at as we get further in, right? So, but that is a theme to keep in mind as we approach those chapters with that relationship. Okay. Jormungandr in the Discord says, a lot of derivatives of the Frankenstein, or reinterpretations, I guess, don't mention the familial connections that the original book does. Yeah, this is exactly the sort of stuff that you're going to cut out if you're trying to cram this into a 90-minute movie. Hey, good morning, Evanetta. We just finished chapter 1 of Frankenstein, which means we need to update our what we're reading link to reflect that we're on chapter 2 now. So let me update those pins before we start the next chapter. Replace pinned message. And unpin after, or manually unpin it into stream. Where We Are Again says, reread Frankenstein for a course not long ago. The theme of familial relationships, especially with Robert Walton writing to his sister, is strong. Yep, recurring motif we're going to revisit throughout the story. So, let's move on to chapter 2 of Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus, by Mary Shelley. We were brought up together. There was not quite a year difference in our ages. I need not say we were strangers to any species of disunion or dispute. Harmony was the soul of our companionship, and the diversity and contrast that subsisted in our characters. Oh, hold on, sorry. That's that weird visual glitch. Voxy is great for when you're flying around long distances, but there's still some visual glitches when you're digging large numbers of blocks. And since we're digging large numbers of blocks rather than exploring long-distance travel right now, yeah, let's just turn that down. Turn this up slightly. Cool. Yeah, this is still in beta. Okay, Harmony was the soul of our companionship, and the diversity and contrast that subsisted in our characters drew us nearer together. Elizabeth was of a calmer and more concentrated disposition, but with all my ardor, I was capable of a more intense application, and was deeply smitten with the thirst for knowledge. She busied herself with following the aerial creations of the poets in the majestic and wonderful scenes which surrounded our Swiss home, the sublime shapes of the mountains, the changes of the seasons, tempest and calm, the silence of winter, and the life and turbulence of our alpine summers. She found ample scope for admiration and delight, while my companion contemplated a serious and while my companion contemplated with a serious and satisfied spirit the magnificent appearances of things, I delighted in investigating their causes. The world was to me a secret which I desired to divine. Curiosity, earnest research to learn the hidden laws of nature, gladness akin to rapture, as they were unfolded to me, are among the earliest sensations that I can remember. On the birth of a second son, my junior by 7 years, my parents gave up entirely their wandering life and fixed themselves in their native country. We possessed a house in Geneva and a campaign on Belle Rive, the eastern shore of the lake, at the distance rather more than a league from the city. We resided principally in the latter, and the lives of my parents were passed in considerable seclusion. It was my temper to avoid a crowd and attach myself fervently to a few. I was indifferent, therefore, to my schoolfellows in general. But I united myself in the bonds of the closest friendship to one of them. Henry Clerval was the son of a merchant of Geneva. He was a boy of singular talent and fancy. He loved enterprise, hardship, and even danger for its own sake. He was deeply read in books of chivalry and romance. He composed heroic songs and began to write many a tale of enchantment and knightly advantage. He tried to make us act plays and to enter into masquerades, in which the characters were drawn from the heroes of Roncesvalles, of the Round Table of King Arthur, and the chivalrous train who shed their blood to redeem the Holy Sepulchre from the hands of the infidels. No human being could have passed a happier childhood than myself. My parents were possessed by the very spirit of kindness and indulgence. We felt that they were not the tyrants to rule our lot according to their caprice, but the agents and creators of all the many delights we thoroughly enjoyed. When I mingled with other families, I distinctly discerned how peculiarly fortunate my lot was, and gratitude assisted the development of filial love. My temper was sometimes violent, and my passions vehement, but by some law in my temperature, they were not turned toward childish pursuits, but to an eager desire to learn. And whether it was the outward substance of things, or the inner spirit of nature, and the mysteries of man that compelled me, still my inquiries were directed to the metaphysical, or, in its highest sense, the physical secrets of the world. Meanwhile, Clerval occupied himself, so to speak, with the moral relations of things. The busy stages of life, the virtues of heroes, and the actions of men were his theme, and his hope and dream was to become one among whose names are recorded in story as the gallant and adventurous benefactors of our species. The saintly soul of Elizabeth shone like a shrine, dedicated lamp in our peaceful home. Her sympathy was ours. Her smile, her soft voice, the sweet glance of her celestial eyes were ever there to bless and animate us. She was the living spirit of love to soften and attract. I might have become sullen in my study, rough through the ardor of my nature, but that she was there to subdue me to a semblance of her own gentleness. And Clerval, could aught ill entrench the noble spirit of Clerval? Yet he might not have been so perfectly humane, so thoughtful in his generosity, so full of kindness and tenderness. Amidst his passion for adventurous exploit, had she not unfolded to him the real loveliness of beneficence and made the doing good the end and aim of his soaring ambition? I feel exquisite pleasure in dwelling on the recollections of childhood, before misfortune had tainted my mind and changed its bright visions of extensive usefulness into gloomy and narrow reflections upon self. Besides, in drawing the picture of my early days, I also record those events which led, by insensible steps, to my aftertale of misery. For when I would account to myself for the birth of that passion which afterwards ruled my destiny, I find it arise, like a mountain river, from ignoble and almost forgotten sources. But, swelling as it proceeded, it became the torrent which, in its course, has swept away all my hopes and joys. Natural philosophy is the genius that has regulated my fate. I desire, therefore, in this narration, to state those facts which led to my predilection for that science. When I was 13 years of age, we all went on a party of pleasure to the baths near Thanon. The inclemency of the weather obliged us to remain a day confined to the inn. In this house, I chanced to find a volume of the works of Cornelius Agrippa. I opened it with apathy. In the theory which he attempts to demonstrate and the wonderful facts which he relates soon changed that feeling into enthusiasm. A new light seemed to dawn upon my mind, and bounding with joy, I communicated my discovery to my father. My father looked carelessly at the title page of my book and said, "Ah, Cornelius Agrippa, my dear Victor, do not waste your time upon this. It is sad trash. If, instead, my father had taken the pains to explain to me that the principles of Agrippa had been entirely exploded, and that a modern system of science had been introduced which possessed much greater powers than the ancient, because the powers of the latter were chimerical, while those of the former were real and practical, under such circumstances, I should certainly have thrown Agrippa aside, and have contented my imagination, warmed as it was, by returning with greater ardor to my former studies. It is even possible that the train of my ideas would never have received the fatal impulse which led to my ruin. But the cursory glance my father had taken of the volume, by no means assured me he was acquainted with old assured me that he was by no means acquainted with its contents, and I continued to read with the greatest avidity. When I returned home, my first care was to procure the whole works of this author, and afterwards of Paracelsus and Albertus Magnus. I read and studied the wild fancies of these writers with delight. They appeared to me treasures known to a few besides myself. I have described myself as always having been imbued with a fervent longing to penetrate the secrets of nature. In spite of the intense labor and wonderful discoveries of modern philosophers, I always came from my studies discontented and unsatisfied. Sir Isaac Newton is said to have avowed that he felt like a child picking up shells beside the great and unexplored ocean of truth. Those of his successors in each branch of natural philosophy with whom I was acquainted appeared to even my boy's apprehensions as tyros engaged in the same pursuit. The untaught peasant beheld the elements around him and was acquainted with their practical uses. The most learned philosopher knew little more. He had partially unveiled the face of nature. And rashly and ignorantly I had repined. But here were books, and here were men who had penetrated deeper and knew more. I took their word for all that they averred, and I became their disciple. It may appear strange that such should arise in the 18th century, but while I followed the routine education in the schools of Geneva, I was, to a great degree, self-taught with regard to my favorite studies. My father was not scientific, and I was left to struggle with a child's blindness, added to a student's thirst for knowledge. Under the guidance of my new preceptors, I entered with the greatest diligence into the search of the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life, but the latter soon obtained my undivided attention. Wealth was an inferior object, but what glory would attend the discovery if I could banish disease from the human frame and render man invulnerable to any but a violent death? Nor were these my only visions. The reigning of ghosts, or devils, was a promise liberally accorded by my favorite authors, the fulfillment of which I most eagerly sought, and if my incantations were always unsuccessful, I attributed the failure rather to my own inexperience and mistake than to a want of skill or fidelity in my instructors. And thus, for a time, I was occupied by exploded systems, mingling like an unadept 1,000 contradictory theories and floundering desperately in a very slough of multifarious knowledge, guided by an ardent imagination and childish reasoning, till an accident again changed the current of my ideas. When I was about 15 years old, we retired to our house near Bellerive, when we witnessed the most violent and terrible thunderstorm. It advanced from behind the mountains of Jura, and the thunder burst at once with frightful loudness from various quarters of heaven. I remained while the storm lasted, watching its progress with curiosity and delight. As I stood at the door, on a sudden I beheld a stream of fire issue from an old and beautiful oak, which stood about 20 yards from our house. And so soon as the dazzling light vanished, the oak had disappeared, and nothing remained but a blasted stump. When we visited it the next morning, we found the tree shattered in a singular manner. It was not splintered by the shock, but entirely reduced to thin ribbons of wood. I never beheld something so utterly destroyed. Before this, I was not unacquainted with the more obvious laws of electricity. On this occasion, a man of great research in natural philosophy was with us, and excited by this catastrophe, he entered on the explanation of a theory which he had formed on the subject of electricity and galvanism, which was at once new and astonishing to me. All that he said threw greatly into the shade Cornelius Agrippa, Albertus Magnus, and Paracelsus, the lords of my imagination. But by some fatality, the overthrow of these men disinclined me to pursue my accustomed studies. It seemed to me as if nothing would or could ever be known. All that had so long engaged my attention suddenly grew despicable. By one of those caprices of the mind which we are now most subject to in early youth, I at once gave up my former occupations, set down natural history and all its progeny as a deformed and abortive creation, and entertained the greatest disdain for a would-be science which could never even step within the threshold of real knowledge. In this mood of mind, I betook myself to the mathematics and the branches of study appertaining to that science as being built upon secure foundations, and so worthy of my consideration. Thus strangely are our souls constructed, and by such slight ligaments are we bound to prosperity or ruin. When I look back, it seems to me as if this almost miraculous change of inclination and will was the immediate suggestion of the guardian angel in my life. The last effort made by the spirit of preservation to avert the storm that was even then hanging in the stars and ready to envelop me. Her victory was announced by an unusual tranquility and gladness of the soul which followed the relinquishing of my ancient and latterly tormenting studies. It was thus that I was to be taught to associate evil with their prosecution, happiness with their disregard. It was a strong effort of the spirit of good, but it was ineffectual. Destiny was too potent, and her immutable laws had decreed my utter and terrible destruction. And thus concludes Chapter 2 of Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, by Mary Shelley. Okay, so Dotbit Gaming says, I never thought about where Albertus Magnus College got their name before. It might be a total coincidence, Dotbit Gaming. I See Two Colors says, how can I play this world? I want to explore it. We release a world download when the season ends. We're probably about halfway through this season, so maybe a year or so, the world download will become available. And it'll be available at HermitCraft.com. Okay, we got a tip rolling in. Let's see who it is from. Wait, is this working? Hold on. Whoa, we got more than one tip, actually. Thank you very much to Richard, who says, for being intangibly rich and improving our ecosystem by being nothing more than who you are. Well, that's very kind of you to say, Richard, who also who tips 8, so that's going to get us now $7 away from the next Phase Camera expansion milestone. Thank you for the kind words and for supporting my show. Also, thanks to Cassio from YouTube, who tips for a great read aloud and discussion. I love your book club atmosphere, Joe. And then there's another 15 in there, so that's going to get us 8 past our next expansion milestone. Please direct your attention to the lower left. If you've never seen a Joe Hill stream before, you might not know that the camera gets bigger when we hit certain tipping milestones, like we just did. So here we go. Expand Joe. Yeah. It's me. Hi. I'm the Joe Hills. It's me. So thank you very much to Cassie O for that. And then we got a tip from Alexandra, who says, I love your streams, and tips a full 20. That's a full face camera expansion milestone. So that's going to get us 8 past that next milestone. So please direct your attention down here once more. You've seen that money go straight to my head with each face camera expansion milestone we hit, but now, like Jacob Marley, these chains I forged in life are about to begin pulling me down to the deep below as they remind me that humanity was my business. Enter the Jost. Ba, 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 ba. Lowering the Joe Pasty now to 90%. Thank you very much to Alexandra. That puts us now 12 away from the next expansion. And tips are welcome via paypal.me/Joe Hills and YouTube Super Chat. Yeah, the last 9 seasons are available to download at HermitCraft.com. Glad to help you keep from crashing out while you do your work, TB. Nathan and Bear writes, thanks a lot, Agrippa, radicalizing our young natural philosophers. I know, right? Okay, so that's all the caffeine gone. Unless I feel like getting up and getting another sun drop. But I think I'm good for right now. Is HermitCraft a whitelist server? Yeah, it's invite only. Okay, so where were we? Let's take a quick second to review how far we've gotten on our terraforming, because it's sometimes hard to tell when you're in it. Okay, that's the zoom out. See, the thing is, there's not a zoom in button and a zoom out button. There's just a zoom button, and then I have to use the scroll wheel to change it from out to in. It's fine. We're doing great, though. We're doing just great. Okay, so we are going to mark all 3 of these as red. Great, great, great. So, yeah. So we have cleared out a good portion of that. It's pretty clear we're going to need to continue to clear out over this way as well. We've got to clear out between there and there. That's not at the right height either. Okay. Okay, we need to start placing grass as well along there. Bum 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 bum. Bum ba-dum bum bum ba-dun dun dun dun. Is it invite only the same as whitelist? Well, not necessarily, because like, you know, if the server is on like a custom network that requires a special VPN to connect to, you would need the invite to have access to that VPN connection, right? Like, whereas a whitelist is something in Minecraft, but special network configurations and VPNs are outside of Minecraft. So they're functionally the same. If you don't have an invite, you won't be able to connect to the server, but there's additional protections on this server beyond just a whitelist. We won't go into detail about those, but it saves us a lot of hassle. No worries, failed vegan. There will be chapter 2 will be available in the VOD. This is the one stream a week that is guaranteed to have a VOD. I go out of my way to not do all the things that break VODs, like including music and like 8 other things that I don't even want to get into because they stress me out. But yeah. Okay, so here we go. Clearing this out. Boom, boom, boom. Good evening, Pirate Corps. Hope you're doing well. Okay, so we need to get at least as far as... Where is the... So that's the marker on that side, and then that's the marker on that side. Okay, so we need to go at least as far as... Drubaka says, I really missed the Toxic Bed mod. It was a lot of fun to watch. Yeah, it was. Maybe we'll see about getting that back at some point. But I don't have a lot of extra cash to invest in developer hours at the moment. On an unrelated note, tips are welcome via paypal.me/JoeHills and YouTube Super Chat. Okay. So... let's put this over here. We're gonna clear all the pathway that we need. I'm gonna really quickly eyeball how many... Okay, so just scrolling here. Chapter 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that was 7 screens. And that took about a half hour to read. So how many screens is chapter 3? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I think we have time to read chapter 3 if we jump right into it. So before we do, though, let's be smart about this. What do we have to do yet to make sure that we use that time well? We have a bunch of dirt and grass we need to place over there. We need to continue digging this out. The problem is when I'm reading, I kind of have to go on autopilot in game. So I need to use these between chapter segments to really plan stuff. Okay, so that's notable that this is just out of range of the beacon here. So we can't really dig past that anyway without moving the beacon. It seems like now's a good time to switch over. For chapter 3, we can switch over to placing dirt and gravel on the roads and getting stuff cleaned up over there. So let's do that. Okay. Let me real quickly try to figure out what that is in US Abacus beads. Thank you very much for tipping 7 Marlikiki, who says, can't use PayPal, but really enjoying this. Thanks for the coziness. Well, thank you so much for supporting the arts and my work in particular. That gets us now only $5 away from our next face camera expansion milestone. Appreciate it, Marlikiki. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. But yeah. So we do have time to read chapter 3. I just need to make sure that we're set up to read it successfully. So we're going to do some real quick storage of broken tools and things like that. I think, yeah, we can roll through here. That's all going to be gravel, which we need to go... If we're going to be placing a lot of gravel, we need to go get gravel boxes. Which means, let's real quick grab... Oops. We're going to put this up. We're going to put this up. I will say, one thing that's kind of nice about doing this as a Saturday morning stream is normally, by this point in the stream, I'd be like, oh boy, reading 2 chapters took a lot out of me. Maybe we can power through to a 3rd chapter. This time I'm like, boy, I feel great. I still have a whole day's worth of energy. Let's go. So yeah, I did promise my kid that we would go somewhere shortly after the stream, though. Morning, beans. So we can't go super long. That was why I was checking the chapter length, but we can run a little over and we'll be okay. So yeah, gravel was what we came over here for. Do we have any shulkers of gravel? It's just all freestanding or free storing. Have I experienced 2 Bast Tutorius before? No, I'm not really into car movies. I did like The Love Bug. Not usually a huge Disney fan, but I really liked that Love Bug film. I'm trying to think if there's any other car movies I really liked. Oh, you know, the Wachowskis' Speed Racer. I mean, technically that's more of a racing movie than a car movie, but there's enough overlap, I think. But yeah, I'd say I'm not really good at ranking things, but like favorite car movies would be The Love Bug, Speed Racer. What other movies do I like that are car movies? I'm not sure any of the other movies I like would count as car movies. I haven't seen the film Cars. Mr. Sandman, bring me a car, la la la. I will drive it not super far. Okay, so we're going to leave our extra gravel kind of around here because this is our gravelly area. Back to the Future, is that a car movie? I did enjoy Back to the Future and Back to the Future 3. I haven't seen Back to the Future 2 yet, so don't spoil it. Have I not seen Rush? I've seen the Canadian band Rush's Pinball Machine, but I've never seen them perform live. I'm not great at that pinball machine. That's one that, like, I don't know, it just never clicked with me. I gotta practice it. Once I learn the rules, I'm sure I'll be, you know... Like, that's the thing with a lot of pinball machines that I initially bounce off of, is, like, once I understand the rules, I'm like, oh, okay, I see now what the developer was trying to do. But, like, some pinball machines are so intuitive. Like, there's a reason people love Keith Elwin's Godzilla. You start flipping, and you just know what to do. No matter what you're doing, you're advancing something. Like, whereas, like, the game Rush, it's like, wait, what is this time machine? What do I... How am I... I'm collecting records? How am I collecting records? What is going on? Okay. So let's go ahead and figure out what we're doing here. We need... Oh, okay, so we need to lay some groundwork underneath that as well. Okay. Yeah, see, I wasn't sure how long that other task was going to take, so I hadn't really allocated this time well. Okay, so we're going to put some stone in here. Doc, Joe does have a beard now, but don't do weird stuff with caps. It makes it hard for me to read. Lakshmi says, I just had an overwhelming feeling of missing the pinball tournament here. Like, you mean when we all played pinball together at that meetup? Or was there, like, did you just look at your calendar and go, oh no, the IFPA just had a huge tournament in my area and I missed it? Morning, Gritmonger. We are just about to read Chapter 3 once we get some stuff set up. Let's go ahead and upgrade our what we're reading link to correspond with that. What we're reading is Chapter 3. Da da da. Dun 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 da 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 dee. Bum 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 bum. La 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 la. Marla Kiki says, can I ask, why do you use exploding rockets for flight? Personal preference. More of a professional preference, right? This is a visual medium. You should have a little sound, a little light. Give them that old razzle-dazzle, you know? Oh, does Mad Max Fury Road count as a car movie? Okay, so yeah, my 3 favorite car movies are The Love Bug, Mad Max Fury Road, and Speed Racer, though not necessarily in that order. I haven't seen Ford versus Ferrari, but I've heard good things. That's one of those low down on my viewing list, low down on my to-view list, but I just haven't gotten to it. Oh, does the Blues Brothers count as a car movie? It does have like at the time the most destructive car chase in history in it. I did like the Blues Brothers, but I always thought of that as more of a music movie, not a musical perhaps, but like it's a movie about getting the band back together. You know what I mean? To me, that's a music movie. Wait, what is this? DistroKid sent me an email. Your Musician Plus plan will go up in price. Thank you, DistroKid. No, thanks. That's the problem with having my PayPal alerts come through my email, is I also get alerts not only when people tip, but every time somebody invoices me for something. And it's like, ah. So just as on a completely related note, tips are welcome via paypal.me/JoeHills and YouTube Super Chat. DistroKid is what we use to release our albums on like iTunes and Google and stuff. It's only going up by a few dollars a year, but it is one of those things where it's like, great. It's always something. Charles says, Blues Brothers to me is a Saturday Night Live movie. That's fair. That's fair. Although, like, the thing is, though, like, the Blues Brothers bit that they were doing that at live shows before Saturday Night Live. Like, even though, like, they later on did do Blues Brothers stuff on SNL, it wasn't a bit that's originated as an SNL bit. I haven't seen Christine. That's a Stephen King movie, right? A lot of Stephen King movies, I'm like, I'll see it after I read the book, but I haven't had time to read the book. I did just reread, like, 9 of the diving novels by Christine Catherine Rush. Or Rush. I still have to find out how to pronounce her name. But, yeah. I did just reread, like, several of those while I was traveling. So maybe I could have made time to read something new. But I was just like, something's bothering me about these books I read a few years back. Let me revisit them. And I started reading one, then I was like, hold on, let me revisit another one. Wait, that ties in with this novel. Let me pick up. So it's like, before I knew it, I've reread half the, like, 13 or 14 book series. Or over half. Okay. So I think we are about ready. We've got our updated what we're reading link. Okay. So chapter 3. When I had attained the age of 17, my parents resolved that I should become a student at the University of Ingolstadt. I had hitherto attended the schools of Geneva, but my father thought it necessary for the completion of my education that I should be made acquainted with other customs than those of my native country. My departure was therefore fixed at an early date, but before the days resolved upon could arrive, the first misfortune in my life occurred, an omen, as it were, of my future misery. Elizabeth had caught the scarlet fever. Her illness was severe, and she was in the greatest danger. During her illness, many arguments had been urged to persuade my mother to refrain from attending upon her. She had at first yielded to entreaties, but when she learned that the life of her favorite was menaced, she could no longer control her anxiety. She attended her sick bed. Her watchful attentions triumphed over the malignity of distemper. Elizabeth was saved, but the consequences of this imprudence were fatal to her preserver. On the 3rd day, my mother sickened. Her fever was accompanied by the most alarming symptoms, and the looks of her medical attendants prognosticated the worst event. On her deathbed, the fortitude and benignity of this best of women did not desert her. She joined the hands of Elizabeth and myself. "My children," she said, "my firmest hopes of future happiness were placed on the prospect of your union. This expectation will now be the consolation of your father. Elizabeth, my love, you must supply my place to my younger children. Alas, I regret that I am taken from you, and, happy and beloved as I have been, it is not hard to quit you all. Is it not hard to quit you all? But these are not thoughts befitting me. I will endeavor to resign myself cheerfully to death, and will indulge a hope of meeting you in another world." She died calmly, and her countenance expressed affection even in death. I need not describe the feelings of those whose dearest ties are rent by that most irreparable evil, the void that presents itself to the soul, and the despair that is exhibited on the countenance. It is so long before the mind can persuade itself that she whom we saw every day, and whose existence appeared a part of our own, can have departed forever, that the brightness of a beloved eye can have been extinguished, and the sound of a voice so familiar and dear to the ear can be hushed, never more to be heard. These are the reflections of the first days. But when the lapse of time proves the reality of the evil, and then the actual bitterness of grief commences. Yet from whom has not the rude hand rent away some dear connection? And why should I describe a sorrow which all have felt, and all must feel? The time at length arrives when grief is rather an indulgence than a necessity, and the smile that plays upon the lips, although it may be deemed a sacrilege, is not banished. My mother was dead, but we still had duties which we ought to perform. We must continue our course with the rest, and learn to think ourselves fortunate, whilst one remains whom the spoiler has not seized. My departure for Ingolstadt, which had been deferred by these events, was now again determined upon. I obtained from my father a respite of some weeks. It appeared to me sacrilege to so soon to leave the repose, akin to death, of the house of mourning, and to rush into the thick of life. I was new to sorrow, but it did not the less alarm me. I was unwilling to quit the sight of those that remained to me, and above all, I desired to see my sweet Elizabeth in some degree consoled. She indeed veiled her grief and strove to act the comforter to us all. She looked steadily on life and assumed its duties with courage and zeal. She devoted herself to those whom she had been taught to call her uncle and cousins. Never was she so enchanting as at this time, when she recalled the sunshine of her smiles and spent them upon us. She forgot even her own regret in her endeavors to make us forget. The day of my departure at length arrived. Clerval spent the last evening with us. He had endeavored to persuade his father to permit him to accompany me and to become my fellow student, but in vain. His father was a narrow-minded traitor, and saw idleness and ruin in the aspirations and ambition of his son. He said little, but when he spoke, I read in his kindling eye and his animated glance a restrained but firm resolve not to be chained to the miserable details of commerce. We sat late. We could not tear ourselves away from each other, nor persuade ourselves to say the word farewell. It was said, and we retired under the pretense of seeking repose, each fancying that the other was deceived. But when at morning's dawn I descended to the carriage, which was to convey me away, they were all there. My father again to bless me, Clerval to press my hand once more, my Elizabeth to renew her entreaties that I would write often and bestow the less feminine attentions on her playmate and friend. I threw myself into the chase that was to convey me away, and indulged in the most melancholy reflection. I, who had ever been surrounded by amiable companions, continually engaged in endeavoring to bestow mutual pleasure, I was now alone. In the university whither I was going, I must form my own friends, and be my own protector. My life had hitherto been remarkably secluded and domestic, and this had given me invincible repugnance to the new countenances. I loved my brothers, Elizabeth and Clerval. These were old, familiar faces. But I believed myself totally unfitted for the company of strangers. Such were my reflections as I commenced my journey, but as I proceeded, my spirits and hopes rose. I ardently desired the acquisition of knowledge. I had often, when at home, thought it hard to remain during my youth cooped up in one place, and had longed to enter the world and take my station among other human beings, and was conducted to my Now my desires were complied with, and it would indeed have been folly to repent. I had sufficient leisure for these and many other reflections during my journey to Ingolstadt, which was long and fatiguing. At length the high white steeple of the town met my eyes. I alighted and conducted to my solitary apartment to spend the evening as I pleased. The next morning I delivered my letters of introduction and paid a visit to some of the principal professors. Chance, or rather the evil influence, the angel of destruction, which asserted omnipotent sway over me from the moment I turned my reluctant steps from my father's door, led me first to M. Kremp, professor of natural philosophy. He was an uncouth man, but deeply imbued in the secrets of his science. He asked me several questions concerning my progress in the different branches of science appertaining to natural philosophy. I replied carelessly and partly in contempt, mentioning the names of my alchemists as the principal authors I had studied. The professor started.
Have you really spent your time in studying such nonsense?
I replied in the affirmative. Every minute. Oh, sorry.
Every minute, continued Mr. Kremp with warmth. Every instant you have wasted on those books is utterly and entirely lost. You have burdened your memory with exploded systems and useless names. Good God, in what desert land have you lived, where no one was kind enough to inform you that these fancies which you have so greedily imbibed are 1,000 years old, and as musty as they are ancient? I little expected, in this enlightened and scientific age, to find a disciple of Albertus Magnus and Paracelsus. My dear sir, you must begin your studies entirely anew.
So saying, he stepped aside and wrote down a list of several books treating of natural philosophy, which he desired me to procure, and dismissed me after mentioning that at the beginning of the following week he intended to commence a course of lectures upon natural philosophy in its general relations, and that M. Waldman, a fellow professor, would lecture upon chemistry the alternate days that he omitted. I returned home not disappointed, for I have said that I had long considered those authors useless whom the professor reprobated, but I returned not at all the more reclined to recur these studies in any shape. M. Kremp was a little squat man with a gruff voice and repulsive countenance. The teacher, therefore, did not prepossess me in favor of his pursuits. In rather too philosophical and connected a strain, perhaps, I have given an account of the conclusions I had come to concerning them in my early years. As a child, I had not been content with the results promised by the modern professors of natural science, with a confusion of ideas only to be accounted steps of knowledge along the paths of time, and exchange the discoveries of recent inquirers for the dreams of forgotten alchemists. Besides, I had a contempt for the uses of modern natural philosophy. It was very different when the masters of the science sought immortality and power. Such views, although futile, were grand. But now the scene was changed. The ambitions of the inquirer seemed to limit itself to the annihilation of those visions on which my interests were chiefly founded. I was required to exchange chimeras of boundless grandeur for realities of little worth. Such were my reflections during the first 2 or 3 days of my residence at Ingolstadt, which were chiefly spent in becoming acquainted with the localities and the principal residences of my new abode. Or principal residence in my new abode. But as the ensuing week commenced, I thought of the information which M. Kremp had given me concerning the lectures, and although I could not consent to go and hear that little conceited fellow deliver sentences out of a pulpit, I recollected what he had said of M. Waldman, whom I had never seen, as he had hitherto been out of town. Partly from curiosity, and partly from idleness, I went into the lecturing room, which M. Waldman entered shortly after. This professor was very unlike his colleague. He appeared about 50 years in age, but with an aspect expressive of the greatest benevolence. A few gray hairs covered his temples. But those at the back of his head were nearly black. His person was short but remarkably erect, and his voice the sweetest I had ever heard. He began the lecture by a recapitulation of the history of chemistry and the various improvements made by different men of learning, pronouncing with the fervor the names of the most distinguished discoverers. He then took a cursory view of the present state of the science and explained many of its elementary terms. After having made a few preparatory experiments, he concluded with a panegyric upon modern chemistry, the terms of which I shall never forget.
The ancient teachers of this science promised impossibilities and performed nothing. The modern masters promise very little. They know that metals cannot be transmuted, and that the elixir of life is a chimera. But these philosophers, whose hands seem only to dabble in dirt, and their eyes to pore over the microscope or crucible, have indeed performed miracles. They penetrate into the recesses of nature and show how she works in her hiding places. They ascend into the heavens. They have discovered how the blood circulates, the nature of the air we breathe. They have acquired new and almost unlimited power. They can command the thunders of heaven, mimic the earthquake, and even mark the invisible world with its own shadows.
Such were the professor's words. Rather, let me say, the words of the fate announced to destroy me. As he went on, I felt as if my soul were grappling with a palpable enemy. One by one, the various keys were touched, which formed the mechanism of my being. Chord after chord was sounded, and soon my mind was filled with one thought, one conception, one purpose. So much has been done, exclaimed the soul of Frankenstein. Far more will I achieve, treading in the steps already marked. I will pioneer a new way, explore unknown powers, and unfold to the world the deepest mysteries of creation. I closed not my eyes that night. My internal being was in a state of insurrection and turmoil. I felt that order would thence arise, but I had no power to produce it. By degrees, after the morning's dawn, sleep came. I awoke, and my yesternight's thoughts were as a dream. There only remained a resolution to return to my ancient studies and devote myself to a science for which I believed myself, devote myself to a science for which I believed to oh my gosh, this is a hard sentence, sorry. And to devote myself to a science for which I believed myself to possess a natural talent. On the same day, I paid M. Waldman a visit. His manners in private were even more mild and attractive than in public, for there was a certain dignity in his mien during his lecture, which in his own house was replaced by the greatest affability and kindness. I gave him pretty nearly the same account of my former pursuits as I had given to his fellow professor. He heard with attention the little narration concerning my studies, and smiled at the names of Cornelius Agrippa and Paracelsus, but without the contempt that M. Kremp had exhibited. He said that
these were men to whom the indefatigable zeal modern philosophers were indebted for the most of the foundations of their knowledge. They had left it to us the easier task to give new names and arrange in connected classifications the facts which they, in a great degree, had been the instruments of bringing to light. The labors of men of genius, however erroneously directed, scarcely ever fail in ultimately turning to the solid advantage of mankind.
I listened to his statement, which was delivered without any presumption or affectation, and then added that his lecture had removed my prejudices against modern chemists. I expressed myself in measured terms, with the modesty and deference due from a youth to his instructor, and without letting escape inexperience in life would have made me ashamed, any of the enthusiasm which stimulated my intended labors. I requested his advice concerning the books I ought to procure.
I am happy to have gained a disciple, and if your application equals your ability, I have no doubt of your success. Chemistry is that branch of natural philosophy in which the greatest improvements have been and may be made. It is on that account that I have made it my peculiar study. But at that same time, I have not neglected the other branches of science. A man would make but a very sorry chemist if he attended to that department of human knowledge alone. If your wish is to really become a man of science, and not merely a petty experimentalist, I should advise you to apply to every branch of natural philosophy, including mathematics.
He then took me into his laboratory and explained to me the uses of his various machines, instructing me as to what I ought to procure, and promising me the use of his own when I should have advanced far enough in the science not to derange their mechanism. He also gave me the list of books which I had requested, and I took my leave. Thus ended a day memorable to me. It decided my future identity. And that concludes Chapter 4 of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Anybody have any thoughts? Let's see, Maddie AF says, I was on a date with someone and they were telling me about your streams. Well, Maddie AF, I'm glad you're here and that wasn't a huge red flag, although maybe now that you've seen some of my streams, it might appear to be. I make niche performance art, weird Minecraft comedy stuff. What I do is weird, and so it really resonates with some people. But I always tell them, I'm like, you know, because some people are like, man, I want to watch this show with my family, but they don't get it. It's like, that's okay. The more niche or weird your art is, the less people are going to get it, and it's okay if not everybody gets it. So if you're looking at this and going like, boy, this is weird, it's not for me, that's fine. I'm not trying to make art for everybody. I'm trying to make art for myself, and some other people happen to like it too. I wanted to read Frankenstein, so I'm reading Frankenstein. Maddie says they came over as I was watching Scar during the charity stream and told me about how you do this, and I thought that was incredible. Okay, cool. So you are already familiar with HermitCraft. Yeah. I've been on HermitCraft since week 5 of Season 1. I was not a founding member, but I was the first person invited to join the server, making me the original new guy. So, yeah. Yeah, if you're already familiar with HermitCraft, you know that all the hermits are different kinds of artists in their own way. We all bring something different to the table. And I bring the Joe Hills difference to the table, as we call it around here. Just as a reminder for folks that enjoy this sort of weird performance art, this is a viewer-supported stream, and tips are welcome via paypal.me/JoeHills and YouTube Super Chat. We're going to hang out for a few minutes and talk about the chapter we just read, and then we're going to wrap up because I've got family time scheduled today. It's a weekend, and my daughter doesn't have school, so we're going to go hang out. But yeah, anybody have any thoughts on that chapter? I always love doing the Artie, the strongest man in the world voice for the passionate men of science. We tried that in Dracula with Van Helsing, and it worked really well. And, yeah. Now, the thing is, with Dracula, so, most of the books I read on stream, I'm rereading. But, like, Dracula and Moby Dick, I had each read about 10 years earlier. And I'd read previously as well. Dracula I've read several times, but I hadn't read it for, 10 years. So it's like, I knew all the characters, I knew the stuff that was going to happen. Frankenstein, the last time I read Frankenstein was 25 years ago. And you would think when you get older, 25 years ago isn't that much different than 10 years ago. But, boy, I don't have all the characters in my head with this book the way I did with Moby Dick or Dracula. So I am kind of picking voices as I go. But yeah, that one I felt pretty happy with. Nursing Geek Game says, I think we're starting to see the pieces come together of the character that we're familiar with from the movies and stuff. Open Bag 2 mentions in the Discord that modern science promises very little while performing miracles resonated with them because Angela Collier, might be Collier, I'm not sure, talked recently about how physics suffers from this in the modern era. Yeah, physics is one of those fields that, like, encompasses so much. Like, but then it gets subdivided out. Like, so much of physics shapes things like acoustics, shapes things like optics, shapes things like physics underpins all of these really practical day-to-day things. But like people don't necessarily think of those as physics. They think of them as whatever the subdivision is. Griffin says, oh, I missed it. Moby Dick is my favorite book. Well, don't worry. There's an entire playlist of me reading Moby Dick on my channel. I read the entire novel Moby Dick over the course of about a year. I've also read Dracula over the course of about a year. There's playlists for each of those. I probably need to create a page with all of those playlists on my website at some point. That's just a time thing. Yeah, I remember when I was a kid at one point, I had a conversation, like people, speaking of things like how physics just gets into day-to-day life. Like I had a conversation with my grandmother at one point about lasers. And she's like, lasers aren't real. They're just a science fiction thing. And I'm like, no, Grandma, lasers are real. And she's like, well, how come I've never seen one then? I'm like, well, you know what a CD player is, right? And she's like, duh, yeah, everybody knows what a CD player is. It's like a CD player is like a record player, except instead of a needle reading the sound, it's got a laser in it. And she's like, wait, there are lasers in CD players? And they just let people buy those? And I'm like, yeah, not all lasers are as dangerous as in science fiction. And she's like, oh, okay, well, that's good then. But, like, you know, and she wasn't a dumb lady. She just had other stuff she was busy with. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm not trying to call her out, like, look at this dumb, ignorant person, but, like, look at this smart but busy, ignorant person. You know? We all have blind spots. And, yeah, I feel like modern science is so good at accomplishing a lot of its goals that it can recede into the background, right? Which then means it doesn't get enough credit, and the people working on it don't necessarily get enough recognition. Open Bag 2 says, do not look at the laser inside the Blu-ray player. Blu-ray literally means blue ray of light. That's fair. It pays to learn, because knowledge is power. Schoolhouse Rocky, a chip off the block of your favorite schoolhouse, Schoolhouse Rock. Griffin says, my dad works on lasers. It's really hard to make them. Yeah, I'm sure it's not the most straightforward thing. I actually used to work at a small company owned by a optical physicist. He was a professor of optical physics at a local community college, as well as running this like 15-20 person company that designed and built laser rangefinders for like archery and golf and stuff. And it was a really cool place to work. That was one of my summer jobs when I was in college. And yeah, so like I would spend a good portion of my day like aligning lasers. And that's just a thing that you could do when you're 19 and, you know basically basically you just had to know the right people, because it was such a small company, but it was very good to work for. I got a referral from one of my previous bosses at the library I'd worked the summer before, because she knew the optical physicist, and she was like, hey, if you need some extra help over the summer, this Joe guy will work hard. So Queen Dark Lady says, laser alignment, my beloved. Yeah. But like, the thing is, though, too, I'm sure that laser alignment in a physics department, like, because Queen Dark Lady, you're working on a PhD in physics, right? So aligning a laser to meet the standards for a physics department's experiments versus, okay, the lasers that we were buying, if they were aligned 100% perfectly, you might have been able to do a laser range finding test at like 2 kilometers. But we weren't trying to get them aligned to do a laser range finding of 2 kilometers. The stated range for some of our things were 0.5 kilometer, and for some of them was 800 meters, right? So we were not doing, basically, we were buying over-engineered parts that were, because it was cheaper if you're producing a whole bunch of these laser rangefinders to spend less staff time trying to align it perfectly. And also, because these are handheld units that, like, archers and stuff are going to be taking with them, like, these are not lasers that are sitting in a lab somewhere. These are lasers people were carrying around, right? They get jostled, they're in bags, you know. So we would try to get them, get everything aligned such that, you know, the QA thing was slightly better than what we advertised. So even if somebody really took a beating to the thing, it would basically still end up at what we advertised. I mean, if the thing was completely broken, it would stop working, but, like, you know, just somebody dropping it a few times wouldn't kill it. Was I working in metric? I mean, yeah, but, like, I think part of it might be, so the guy who owned the company was into archery, and so were his kids. And they used metric units for everything, so I assumed that was like, oh, archery competitions were brought over from the old world, and they are using metric or something. But I actually don't know. Maybe it's just because he was a physicist and was used to using metric units. We used metric for a lot of stuff, though. But I never really thought about it too hard. I was just kind of like, yeah, I guess that's just what we're doing here. So I'm realizing I don't exactly know why, but I just know that we did, and I didn't, you know. I was really lucky to get that job, so. Not going to spend a bunch of time complaining about the units, you know. Ivan says science and tech stuff tends to be metric even in the US. Yep. Failed Vegan says this show is like English class for people who actually care about English. I don't know. I'm not exactly like, I'm not writing down notes saying like, you know, I feel like some people here, they were technically attending, but they weren't taking part in the discussion. Class has certain academic expectations that this does not. Folks can determine their own level of involvement. Like I said, I'm mostly doing this because I wanted to reread this book. And I'm appreciating y'all indulging me in indulging myself. So, yeah. Not quite the same. Teachers, I've definitely had teachers who are like, I'm not reading this for my own benefit. Or I'm not up here talking for my own benefit.
Whereas, like, I'm totally doing this for my own. This guy says, I'm really enjoying these streams. Frankenstein is utterly fascinating. Yeah, I'm enjoying it too. I'm glad y'all are as well. We're just hanging out for a few more minutes, giving any last-minute tips a chance to roll in. I know on the weekends sometimes PayPal is a little bit slower because I think they do maintenance and stuff or swap things out on weekends. So I want to make sure. I always hate it if I end the stream and then 3 tips roll in. Like, you know, I'll walk away from the computer and then my phone will light up and I'll be like, I could have just stuck around a little longer and thanked those people. Pirate Core says, yeah, I'm hanging around, but I'm not treating it as an educational experience. I mean, things can be educational without being academic. This is definitely not intended to be an academic experience. Jormungander says, archery competitions use either imperial or metric depending on who is hosting the event. And it varies geographically. Like, I guess even within countries. I know the rangefinders did have a setting for feet or meters. They were configurable, so. Troll says, even on the Navy warship I worked on, there was a good mix of metric and imperial. It's interesting. I'm assuming that you're talking about the U.S. Navy in relation to this conversation, but I'm... Drubaka says all of our surveying equipment does both. Yeah, that makes sense. Depending on the context, you need different stuff. And I think that our rangefinders had, like, feet, yards, and meters. Yeah, okay, it was the US Navy. That makes sense. Okay, so where's the back wall of this parking lot? This is such a huge parking lot compared to the other ones. Because, like, they're supposed to have equipment coming through here and stuff, I guess. But it feels weird how big this area is. So we'll want to put some vehicles or something in here. I wonder if any hermits would want to build, like, a dump truck. Or, like, something like that. An Enterprise class aircraft carrier. Oh, that's cool. Okay. Okay, so this corner here we never actually really finished. Which is kind of to be expected. Yeah, we need to place some gravel so we can pick up some blocks. I think it's notable that both Robert Walton, the captain from the earlier bit, and Victor Frankenstein are both very self-taught in their early years, which I think is something that Shelley is sticking to because
I'm assuming that Shelley didn't have access to the British education system the way a gentleman would. And I'm also assuming that's one of the reasons that she set Victor Frankenstein's youth in Italy. So that way, she doesn't have to worry about making stupid mistakes about details of British boarding schools or whatever that her her readers would be familiar with, but that she would look ignorant about, right? You know, you play to your strengths and you kind of route around your weaknesses. How old is the book Frankenstein? You know, I've found I'm very bad at guessing ages, so I don't even try anymore. 1816 is what Wednesday Torrance says. MJ says, being self-taught also goes with the themes of loneliness. I think so as well. I think one of the things that we're going to be seeing a lot of, though, is how being self-taught pushes Robert Walton, Victor Frankenstein, and Shelley to attempt things that other people wouldn't have bothered attempting. We're going to see, like, the idea that, like, oh, you shouldn't even try that because it's obviously stupid. Well, it wasn't obvious to me, you know, and then maybe you win or succeed. Okay. Suzaku 4242 Gaming says she didn't want to deal with the actually guys. Yeah. This guy says, Shelley may have had a superior literary education to most gentlemen of the time. Well, I mean, that's the thing, though, is if that's what you have time for, and that's what you have resources for, you know, it's easier to cultivate something if you have time to spend time on it. There's a lot of stuff that I would love to learn more about that I just haven't had the time to. And so, yeah. If Shelley, you know, grew up in a situation where, hey, all that's available is reading a bunch of random books, well, how do you get good at literature? One of the ways is by reading a lot of random books. And I don't know, for those of you who have been to college, you know that, like, there's always a million things to read in all your courses at school. But part of the problem is it's hard to give anything your full attention when you're taking a whole bunch of classes. And it's also a challenge to self-guide when all of your other time is spent reading. You don't have a lot of extra time to read other things and to develop your own kind of curricula. You're at the mercy of the school, and so is every other student. And so you end up having a lot of people who are approaching things from the same place because they've read the same things. So, yeah, Shelley being self-taught is not necessarily bad in this situation. Like, in theory, if I wanted to get better at making YouTube videos that are, like, good for the algorithm right now, I should watch a lot of YouTube videos. But if I want to get better at making cinematic experiences or audio-visual drama of some kind, I'm better served spending my time watching movies and TV shows that kind of have the vibe I want my work to go toward. That might not be good for the algorithm, but it'll help me solve problems of like how to compose and light shots, when to cut, how to move things around across the frame, things like that better. So, I'm definitely not the most YouTube algorithm savvy person. But I really, when I'm doing like my replay mod shots, I do try to take the time to like think about these things. And when I have time to do research and like learn about how other people make video, I try to like look at some of the older stuff. It's worked for a while. But there's not really a curriculum for doing the job I have now. Okay, and we have reached the edge of the beacons. So this is a come back with another beacon situation. Morning, Salem. We're actually just about to wrap up. We've already done last call for tips. But PayPal seems slow today, so I'm giving that a few minutes to roll in. Okay, so this part the beacon is fine for at least. How high up is that boundary? Oh boy, that's pretty far up. Okay, let's take a second and review what we've gotten done today. In the light of the moon. We have extended this parking lot significantly. We have gotten this partially uncovered. We've got room to start building this. We've got room at least to start building the Welcome Center next week. Yeah, let's see. How are we for time? I do need to wrap up in a little bit, but we're still technically in the clear for staying on schedule. How are we on inventory? Good. Now we're out of the beacon range. Salem says, wow, that's a lot of progress. Yeah, it's amazing what you can get done if you actually just work on the build for 2 hours instead of flying around all the time. By which I mean it's amazing what I could get done if I actually work on the build for 2 hours instead of just flying around all the time. I have been having so much fun looking at stuff long distance with the Voxy mod. I'm very excited about using that in future episodes. And in this episode, but okay. How are we for inventory space? Not great. Dun 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 dun. Dun 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 dun. Dun 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 dun. Let's just toss some of this stuff in here to sort later. Shovel trade-off. Dun dun. But yeah, so let's see. We got through 3 chapters of Frankenstein today. I haven't checked how long Chapter 4 is. Chapter 4 doesn't seem very long. Chapter 5 and 6. Okay, so we might be able to do 3 chapters a stream.
Although I'm not sure how uniform the lengths are later on in the book. But that's, it's not bad. Oh, actually, we want to leave the grass on that side. Yeah. It's fine. We'll come back to that. Okay, so this corner we got to round out. Let's just do that now. That's going to annoy me. La da 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 da. Better. Faster. Make it stronger. Make it better, faster, stronger. Okay, so that corner, that's 67. We want to go for 67. Do I have any lights on me? Of course not. Negative 2071. So it looks like basically that's as far as that should roll. So we just... There we go. And there, we just round out that corner like so. We'll just leave that gap there to indicate where that road goes. Fill that in there. Welcome, Pow Pal. Okay, yeah, this part's gonna be weird. It sucks that it's like right between the ranges of the different beacons and stuff, too. That's like challenge. How's Tennessee this time of year? It's getting pretty muggy in my part of Texas, says Pow Pow. It's starting to get that way here. We were kind of in Seattle for the first part of the transition, so it just kind of, when we got back, hit us all at once. Whoops. Jormungandr says, since Shelley's parents were a philosopher and a feminist, they probably had a lot of philosophy books in the home. And literature in general. And Open Bag 2 says, William Godwin was a philosopher anarchist. Or an anarchist philosopher. Percy Shelley was one of Godwin's disciples before running off with his daughter. Gotcha. Did I miss Frankenstein says
Big Papa House. Yeah, we just finished chapter 3, yeah. We read the first 3 chapters, and we are chilling and giving PayPal a chance to process any tips. While I do some last-minute terraforming. Trying to get this parking lot looking presentable so we can catch some vehicles on it. Okay. How are we for inventory space? Not great. And we're out of range of the beacons, of course. Big Papa House has only 3 chapters. I can catch up. Yeah, last week we read the 4 letters that are the epistolary preface to the novel. And then this week we read 3 chapters. This is going to be a VOD of today's and last week's. Every, what do you call it? Frankenstein or read and grind video is going to have a VOD. That's one of the things that makes these readings different from the normal streams. Is this every Saturday morning thing? Or is it going back to Sunday night? It's normally Saturday night here in Tennessee. We're doing it Saturday morning because I'm taking my kids somewhere in a little bit. And so I wasn't going to be able to do the show tonight. Yep, I keep the reading VODs, but only the reading VODs because I have to change a bunch of stuff about the format of the show that I don't like doing every day. But that's the reason, for example, there's no music. Okay. Okay. Great flying. Okay. Oh, it has been a full day in Minecraft since we did that last call for tips, and so I think if PayPal was going to give us anything, it would have by now. So apologies if anybody has tipped and I haven't thanked you yet. I will definitely see that whenever it does come in. Big Papa House says, Joe, I have to say it. I appreciate this dedication. I work on a much smaller scale Minecraft-wise. I have trouble with even that sometimes. This size of project is beyond anything I could even tackle, and I enjoy the journey. Hey, I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah. Trying to build things, trying to take advantage of the opportunities we have, you know? Like, y'all are so generous in allowing me to do this, and I want to make sure that I'm pushing the boundaries creatively to really make something interesting happen here. So let's go ahead and lay our heads down and dream, and then we're going to wrap up the stream. Okay, twitch.tv/directory/following. It looks like... Where is False? I didn't realize False was still on the server. False seems to be over at Ren's place. So we're going to raid False. And when you get over there, our raid message is, howdy y'all, Joe Hill's raid here. Until next time, y'all, this is Joe Hills from Nashville, Tennessee. Keep it